the ability to go and do something crazy like ride 200 miles is truly like a privilege that not everyone gets to have, whether it's injury, whether it's sickness, whether it's, socioeconomics or just opportunities. Like the fact that this is my job is something that like, that's what's always going to like make this valuable.
Welcome to the Alt Route Cycling Podcast, dedicated to covering the exciting and challenging off-road and alternate events that is growing enormously in popularity. Join us as we delve into the alternate cycling calendar of gravel racing, mountain bike racing, ultra endurance, and other mixed cycling events. I'm your host, Nick Licandro, and this podcast is brought to you by Triathlon Coaching, a coaching service to help you train smarter and race faster, including for any of your alternate cycling events. I hope you enjoy this episode and keep joining us as we explore the roads less travelled. In today's episode, we are joined by American gravel pro Izzy King. Izzy has had an incredible journey. D1 college soccer player to the trading floor in New York. Professional triathlete turned professional gravel racer. A latecomer to cycling, she is now mixing it with Olympians, national champions and world tour riders as one of 35 females in the Life Time Grand Prix series. With a string of impressive results to her name in her short cycling career, she is proving to be a crowd favourite with her positive, upbeat nature and infectious smile. Welcome to the Alt Route Cycling Podcast, Izzy King. All right, second episode of the Alt Route Podcast, joined by Izzy King, who I'm pretty stoked about. We were just talking off air before. I don't really know if it's called off air or on air, but basically we met 12 months ago, and we haven't seen each other since then at Unbound, so it's super cool to have you on the podcast and get to chat after all this time.
Yeah, great to see you again.
Actually, I should mention, even though you are an LA local, you do have a bit of a link to Australia because you are sponsored by Pedal Mafia, which is a Perth-based company. So I think we can kind of claim you as maybe part Australian.
Yeah, I would be honored. Absolutely.
We were chatting about the Dirty Warnie last year, and I was trying to get you to come down and race. So maybe this year or next year we can get you down for a gravel race.
I've talked about it with Pedal Mafia as well. I think that would be super, super fun. I think like just getting into this sport and being relatively new, I think the hardest thing for me is I feel like a kid in a candy store. Like there's a zillion races that I want to do, and there's only so much time, and your body can only put up with so much. So you're like racing against the clock of like how many years do I get to race, and like what can I fit in my calendar without breaking myself, which is a hard balance, but it's also like incredibly fortunate to be in that position.
You spoke like that it was kind of a pretty deliberate strategy. I love it because it's pretty bold when you think about it. And I heard your last podcast and you spoke about and I love this, Strava, and you getting a heap of QOMs around LA. And then I don't know whether Canyon kind of saw that or you'd reached out to Canyon or how that worked. But talk us about how like your first kind of sponsorships unfolded.
Yeah.
And what capacity was that and how that's, I guess, branched out from there?
Yeah, it started on Strava was just kind of how I got a little bit of notoriety. There was no racing, so that was my competitive outlet. The ability to test yourself against women that have gone the fastest on the climbs around LA. LA is kind of a notorious training ground for people in the winter pros to come train. So there were some really notable names on a lot of those leaderboards. That said, I'd gotten, over, I think I got like 1,800 in 2020, and I still kind of couldn't really get traction. The goal at the time was to sign with a road team, and they were all kind of like, great, this is really good power, but you've never done a road race. You're a Cat 5. And so I was kind of like, what can I do? I have the drive, I have the motivation, but I can't sign with the team. And so I ended up reaching out to the president of Canyon on LinkedIn, which was like a very business school move. And I always, whenever I say this, I'm like, man, he's going to get a zillion LinkedIn messages. But it was even, I was saying basically like, I'm ready to get a job, but this is kind of like, if you have any advice, you've had a really good background. Kind of, he had an interesting trajectory through kind of the cycling and sports world. And he answered my message and we jumped on the call. And then my first contract with Canyon was actually focused around Strava. I was paid to go get QOMs, and then they kind of lucked out when I showed up to Unbound and came in 8th, and they were like, wait a second, she actually might be a good racer. And so from there, I've kind of like branched away from the Strava stuff and gone full into racing, which is nice. I also do totally take for granted I timed this gravel thing unexpectedly well. In the last like 2 years, it's blown up to a whole different level of competition. Last year at Unbound, I went 2.5 hours faster and I finished in 12th instead of 8th. And you're like, that was insane. The course was different, but also like my average power was faster. Like everything, my nutrition was more dialed, like everything was better. I had gotten a lot better and the competition had gotten exponentially better. And so I think with this world, like if I had started and had the season that I had last year and that was my first season, I would have been like, oh, I don't know what this is for me. But now kind of like I had like 3 months in 2021 that I raced and I did really well. I finished top 10 in every race. And then last year I tried to race for 9 months, and we can kind of talk about the Life Time Grand Prix and how that works. But like I attempted to be fast for all of those 9 months, and kind of the goal was to finish average fast on all of them. And it didn't work out so well. I ended up burning myself out pretty good. And kind of by August, I wasn't feeling great and was looking down the barrel of like 3.5, 4 more months of racing, of kind of like the toughest races as well. And so I think this year coming into it with a little bit of a different strategy as well, to try and kind of like have a little bit of a balance and peaks and valley within the year, because you can't just be fast for 8 months.
No, there's a couple of things I want to explore there, because you mentioned that gravel has exploded in America in the last couple of years. So you got a lot more people, and that being from like World Tour or from mountain bike, wanting to come across now. So it's made it even more competitive with sponsorship. And I guess you've been a little bit luckier that you came in a couple of years ago and now you've more established in terms of with your sponsors. Do you find it hard moving forward now on how to continue to build and give back to your sponsors or other people coming in?
I think it's a balance. I think for me, I've been able to build kind of a brand and a personality. I think I walk the line a little bit between influencer and bike racer. I'm kind of both. And with that was kind of like, if we talk about like being purposeful in the cycling, women's cycling specifically, like I saw a hole in the industry in that there were very fast professional racers that didn't really do social media. And then there were women that were only doing social media and didn't really ride bikes. And then to kind of mush those two together is kind of where I fall. And so with that, I do think I've kind of created like a little bubble of where I can be successful within it. All of my partners are partnered with me because they enjoy like the energy and the storytelling that I bring. None of my contracts are performance based, which on one side is super, it's kind of a relief when things go poorly, but also on the other side, like I have built this kind of like persona and spotlight around me. I wear bright orange. I'm very obvious in races. And so it is interesting when things go poorly, like you can't just like hide. Everyone asks about how did it go? What happened? Like everyone out on the course is like, how's it going? And you're like, it's going really terribly. Like, it was like, so it's a give and take of like, definitely I feel like I do have a little bit of cushion with the partnerships because I've set it up on purpose to be more, kind of like a storytelling and an influential, I don't know, social media figure. But also on the other side, I've kind of learned that there's a reason that the fastest racers just race and don't worry about the social media side, because photo shoots and making YouTube videos and, you know, doing shakeout rides and, you know, hanging out at the expo, like all those things take energy. And if you only have a certain amount of energy to be training and to be racing, if you want to be the best, like to waste energy doing that kind of stuff is going to take away from it. So I've been trying to figure out like what is the balance between me being a competitive person myself and wanting to win these races and wanting to do the best I can and put everything that I can in training. And then also knowing that like, because I've built the brand the way that I have, the other stuff is also equitably important, if not more. And how do I then, you know, make sure that I'm not putting so much pressure on myself that I lose the joy of racing because I've put too much energy in the other side of it.
Yeah, that's so unique, and I think some people would think it's pretty wild that you're a pro gravel racer, right? So you're getting to do what you love, you're getting paid for it, but there's no, as you mentioned in your contract, there's no clause for results.
Yeah.
And it's based around yourself. So, and one of the things that I really struck me about you when I first met you is that you're very authentic and that you're yourself. And it's pretty amazing that you get to live a life where you get to ride your bike, which is something you love, and you've done it really smartly yourself because you've created this around you, but you just get to be your authentic self, which is pretty amazing combination to get to just not have to put on a persona or perception when you go to these races. You get to be yourself.
Totally.
And you're getting to do what you love.
Totally. Like I had a friend and he was like, is it gonna like, at one point are you just gonna like, is it gonna get exhausting that you always have to smile and say hi to everyone and ask them what and I was like, no, like that part to me is energizing. Like I am fundamentally an extrovert. So like spending hours and hours by myself alone in the mountains is on one side, like the hardworking side. I love that. But like at these races, like I said, like meeting you and like hearing everyone's stories, or like Unbound was my first race 2 years ago and having people come up to me and be like, I'm here because like you did it as your first race and I'm just going to like do it. And I do think like a huge part of gravel is the 4,000 other people that line up behind the top 1% and the pros. And I think like the only reason that us pros have jobs is because the other people are also racing. And that means that we provide value to our partners. And so with that, like the moment that you forget that and you think that you're above anyone else in a race, I don't know, you've kind of lost the main point of it. And with that, like we said, everyone is coming to gravel. 2 years ago, I was so new, and now like I'm like totally in the mix in the Life Time Grand Prix, and I think it's really fun. Like if I meet a 22-year-old that's just getting into it, they could be absolutely blowing my doors off like in 6 months, or if not the next day in the race. And so I think that part of it is very fun. In that everyone's there and everyone can be a part of it, no matter if they're trying to win or just survive and finish. So yeah, it's nice to not have to like put on a persona. And it's also like my social media is like curated, but like very uncurated in a lot of parts. And so like, it is kind of a stream of consciousness a lot of the time. But I've had some success. Like I share the bad stuff. I share like when I'm really sad or, you know, things are not going my way as well. So it isn't all, you know, sunshine and, you know, riding and, you know, just drinking coffee with my friends. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, and that's part of it. And I do love that. But I do think like sharing the other side of it is super, super important to remain kind of authentic.
Yeah, and I love that. And one of the things you touched on before was balance. And I heard you talking about it last year in the back end of the Lifetime series that you probably didn't get that right. You had a jam-packed racing calendar. You had like, I think 6 weddings or something like that, and you were home for like 4 days in 6 weeks or something outrageous. How do you find that balance? I mean, you're a professional athlete. You want to do well. The Lifetime series is something important to you. But how do you balance that with your social life and also just being a normal human being?
Yeah, I think that was definitely like the hardest thing I realized last year. Was it was interesting. Like, people a lot of the times would come up and be like, you're really accessible. Like, I love that you were just at your friend's wedding and blah, blah, blah. And like in my core, I'm like, man, being accessible is killing me. Like, it's absolutely just destroying me. So I do think like, I will always like try and maintain that. But I do think this year, like the approach is unfortunately say no to more things. Like, you have to say no to a few weddings. You're going to miss birthdays. That said, like trying to mix in, like this past week was a recovery week. I had BWR and then Sea Otter back to back. And then I went home to San Francisco and I spent the week with my mom and my sister and her 2 babies, my nieces and nephews. I saw my grandma, my great aunt. Like, I just kind of like was like, family is really important to me. And that side of it, like if I do have extra time on a recovery week, I'm going to spend extra energy seeing my family. And that for me is a balance that I need to keep, because that makes me happy in like a different segment of my life. And knowing that like bike racing right now is my career, I do have to make sure that I'm like keeping the things that I need to keep me sane, and then also saying no to the things that I know will just take away from my bike racing. Because I did realize last year, when you're attempting to race and then travel to a wedding the next weekend and also bring your bike and do a training ride the morning of before the wedding, and then go to the wedding, and then next, like you're missing the time with your family before the wedding, and then at the wedding you're trying to be super present and you're drinking and you're having a great time, and then the next day you're like, wow, this training ride is not gonna happen. And so I ended up feeling like I was doing everything pretty mediocre, and that's not a feeling I want to repeat. So this year the goal is say no to more things, know that the Lifetime series is really long, take those 7 events and say, these are the main focus of the year. I'll have a few others mixed in here and there. And then also like no 6 weddings, like maybe 1.
It's hard because the two need to coexist together. I think like you have to have the off the bike stuff working the way it needs to in order for you to be going well on the bike too. So it's hard to say like, I think I'm not going to do this wedding, or I'm going to sacrifice catching up with friends, because I think sometimes, I know for me, I've gone too far down the hole of training, and you become so absorbed in your results and being on the bike that as soon as you have a bad day, it takes away from everything, and you don't have the other things that off the bike to kind of pull you out of that and give you perspective.
Totally.
Is that something you found?
No, absolutely. Like I found last year, you're like, it's a dream to have like your joy outlet also be your job, and it's also your social life, and it's also, I don't know. So having your career, your social life, your happiness outlet, and also like having them all be the same thing, revolve around a bike. As soon as you lose the joy of riding a bike, like it gets dark really quickly and you don't have much to pull you back out. Whereas like if you have a 9-to-5 job, it's not as much time on the bike, but also when the bike is not going well, like you can be crushing your job. And I do find like even in college, like whenever soccer wasn't going well, like I got really, really good grades in school, because you're like, man, I'm not enjoying this right now, but I'm going to throw all my energy into something else. And that is how you kind of keep the balance. And so, yeah, it's finding that I was even like, I don't like financially need to get a job, because I've made it that my partners are supporting like the life that I have right now. But should I just get a job for like sanity? And then you're like, if I get a job like for the social interaction outside the bike, then again, that's exhausting. Do I get a job? And for me, like even taking a part-time job, I do know I am someone that if I have a project, I must finish it. And so then I'll go full force into that, and then the biking will suffer. So it is kind of for me taking that and saying like, you have to add little joys, like FaceTiming my family if I can't go see them, like just to keep in touch, or like, doing little stuff outside the bike that isn't so exhausting. Seeing friends for dinner. Everyone has to eat dinner. I have to eat dinner as an athlete. Like I'm not going to go to the club, but like I'll go have dinner with you before.
I love it. It's interesting you talk about like having things to pull you away and make you happy when you're not crushing it on the bike.
Yeah.
You came to cycling pretty late, like you were 27, you're in the Lifetime Grand Series, which is you're 1 out of 35 athletes. There's like women that have raced in the World Tour, doing the Tour de France. There's Olympians, like amazing athletes, and you're being a D1 soccer player, then triathlete, now gravel rider. How do you approach the Lifetime Series being somewhat relatively inexperienced on the gravel compared to these people that have been doing it all their life? Because we spoke about the mentality for Sea Otter, for example, is that you know that you're probably not going to win it. So, totally. And you're an ultra competitive person. So how do you go into a race like that? What's your mindset? And even for the whole Lifetime Grand Series, like what are you trying to get out of it? Is it just constant improvement? And how do you step back and still have that perspective of I'm still improving a heap as an athlete here, even though I'm not winning.
Totally. I think Seattle was interesting. Seattle is so technical and going into that. So we started with probably like a 2-minute on the track, on the Laguna Seca track climb into the single track. And my goal for that, I was like, I have good 2-minute power. Unfortunately for everyone that's really technical, I will beat you to that single track. And I think I was 9th into the single track, and we started going downhill, and I had 40 girls behind me, and it took about 10 seconds to the girl behind me goes, "Excuse me, you're going really, really slowly." And I was like, "Yeah, you probably should have been faster." Like,
that's so funny.
It was like, honestly, and like, I was ready for it. I was like, yeah, I have told everyone that was my strategy. Like, it was very funny. I was going up the first climb, and I started to go past, I don't know her name, but she just won Cape Epic. She was wearing the South Africa jersey. And I started to go past her, and I was like, I better not. Like, that one might be low. I should probably let her go. Seattle was definitely like going into it, you know that you're not going to win that race. Like, I don't have the technical skills to compete at that level. My legs felt really good. I unfortunately had some bike mechanical issues, and it was a 2-lap race, and I was coming around and about to finish lap 1, and I had gone from 10th place literally into last place. And as we said, like, I was ready to just absolutely be like, nope, this is not my day. But I caught 2 girls on the final climb coming to finish the first lap. And in my head, I was like, okay, people are cracking. Like, this is a long series. If I start with a DNF, that's 0 points. If I pass anyone, that's better than that. So now I passed 2 girls. And I will just be like, let's keep riding and see if I can just like deal with what's broken on my bike and use it as a fitness day and build some skills and see who I can call back. And I ended up calling back like 16 girls on the second lap. So I was like, okay, I'm in 23rd now rather than being in 35th. So it's a mentality of like, okay, this hopefully is your drop race, but if it's not, how many points can we salvage? It's a really long season, and you're here, and you put the effort in your training, your legs feel good. Let's use this opportunity. And so I do think that part is interesting. And then on the other side, so I did the Life Time Grand Prix last year. I'll go back and race all of these races again for the second or third time. So I'm competitive versus the other girls, but I'm also super competitive versus myself. I think Leadville is a really interesting example. Leadville gives you a belt buckle if you finish. They give you a bigger belt buckle if you finish in under 9 hours. So the first year I finished in 9:15 something, and I was like, amazing. That was the longest mountain bike race I live at 6 feet. I just raced at 10,000 feet. And then last year I was like, can I get under 9 hours? And I did, and I got the big belt buckle. I went half an hour faster, and I was pumped. And despite, I actually have no idea where I finished in that race place wise, but I had a personal goal of going against the clock, and that for me was really interesting. And I do think like, if there is, I was joking about it the other day, like I was looking at someone's resume and they had this like yada yada honors award, and I looked up what that award was, and the award was that you got a 3.4 GPA and you never had a B- in a class. And I was kind of like, that just means you did fine. Like that's not, you weren't top 10 in the class, like you just did fine. And I was like, man, we should have like, races should have like the resilience award. You didn't win, but you overcame adversity and you finished, and the sun wasn't down before you finished. And like, you can tell your coworkers, like, they'd be like, hey, how was the race? You're like, I didn't win, but I got the resilience award. And they don't know what that means, but like, it sounds better. So I was like, man, bike racing needs to add something like that, because I do think like there's a lot of it. Like, once you get past like the goal of, can I finish? Then the goal is, can I go faster? And for me now, the goal is, can I beat these girls in Lifetime Grand Prix? But I do think if we go back to like, these races have thousands of people, and there hopefully is something between can I finish and can I win? And finding that is kind of like where you grow the sport, if that makes sense. Like I've talked to a lot of like fast amateur friends that I have, and they're like, for me, it's not super fun to do these gravel races because I'm going to get my butt kicked by all the pros. But like, coming in 110th is like not a super fun goal for me. And so it's almost like you have to add like these little prizes in there in between to like grow like the middle of the sport.
I love that so much. It's so true. And I resonate with that so much, because I wanted to do Unbound for like 3 or 4 years, and I was down to do it pre-COVID. COVID hit. And then that was at that point where gravel exploded. So I kind of got to Unbound, like wanting a top 10 for like 3 years. And then I knew that the competition had just got so hard that I knew that was going to be a really difficult task. And I think I got like 40th, which I look back now
is
and
still
go, like,
really, really good.
It is.
But you're like 40. Why would I tell people 40th? Like, it's like
know,
last
that's
year
a hard thing to tell people.
I was 16th in the Grand Prix last year, and you're like, okay, you're the top, you know, that doesn't feel great when it started with 30 people. But like to get 16th, what I went through was crazy. And so I don't know. It's an interesting, I think, because everyone that does race at the top of this sport is like, I want to be first. I want to be first. I want to be first. But there's one person that's going to be first. And so like, how do you as a competitive person, like wrap your head around, like I did my absolute best and that's what I had today. And I trained my butt off for that. And I'm pretty proud of that. And I do think we have to kind of normalize like being proud of those efforts that are really, really impressive for your own self. And I think it was interesting. Like I don't know if you saw it, but there was a basketball player, Giannis was asked, like, do you think that your season was a failure, like right after they were eliminated from the playoffs? And he was like, no, like every year you can't get promoted. Like you can't win every single thing. Like Michael Jordan didn't win everything. Like he's the best in the world. And so I think with that, like keeping that mentality is super helpful. Like we all do want to win, but how do you keep your head, like how do you keep from drowning yourself in that like expectation that I must win? And you will kind of like, it's this paralysis of like, if I can't win, why do I even try? And so I do think like I am trying to say like, even if I don't win, I still like, here's what happened. And like, you should try to do something super, super hard because here's what I learned. And hopefully with that, like we can grow this sport, because as much as it's exploded, we're still like this tiny population of cycling nerds that like wear spandex on the weekends. To the rest of the world, like we're not close to basketball. We're not close to soccer. Like people are like, you're a professional cyclist? Like, oh, you're in the Tour de France? You're like, let me explain what I do. Kind of. And so I think, I do think it's interesting of how, the peaks and valleys that you go through like emotionally as a racer, and all of us wanting to be the best and putting our absolute best out there, and then knowing like sometimes that's just like not going to be enough.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so much to explore within that, but it's having that perspective to be able to step back and be like, you know what I worked through was still amazing. And even though I didn't win, there's still something to be gained for it. Although that's kind of, I feel like, a good perspective that you can have for a race or maybe like 2 races in a row. But how do you put that perspective into a whole series?
It's tough. Like, I think it's hard. I think I finished last year being really, really disappointed in myself. Like I was, you know, the goal was top 10, and I thought if I could kind of finish around the top 10 like I had the year before, like I would do great. And I had the year in 2021, I didn't have a coach. I had gotten a coach. I was, you know, doing the coach. I was doing the nutrition. I was, you know, had everything dialed. This was my second year. I was going back, like, and it's interesting. Like, it's really, really hard to stay positive. I'm a really, really positive person, and I love riding my bike. And that was the first time that I experience what people mean when they're like, I just want to throw my bike in the river. You're like, same, bro. Oh my gosh. Like, so it's hard. I don't know. And it's interesting right now. Like I have loved the last 2 weeks of racing. I am super, super motivated going into Unbound, like to train for that. But so is everybody else. And so like, how do I keep this energy and this mentality going, knowing that I have 7 more months of doing this?
That's tough. And it's interesting because, like, I know it's easy for anyone to get stuck in their head and have that mentality of being like, it's hard. But for me, reading and knowing that your story, being like, that's so amazing where you've come from and where you are now. Like, but it's hard to have that perspective yourself, right? Totally.
Like that's just the reality of like, that's my life so far. And so it's an interesting, you're kind of like, okay, if I'm not doing well, then like, why am I still here? What's the point? And then with that goes kind of back to like the reason that I've built my brand is to hopefully like inspire others and like get more people into this sport and make sure that like it's known that like you can be a really fast pro, but you can also be friendly. Like I'm no better than anyone else out there. And I think that that should generally be like a standard. That shouldn't be like a unique take on the sport. And so with that, like, I think all of that, if I can make this sport a little bit more accessible to anyone, to younger people getting into it, to people that are too intimidated to sign up for a race, to, you know, a girl that doesn't want to go to a group ride because it's all guys, like little things like that are as fulfilling than me doing super well in a race.
So one of the things I love about gravel racing, and what I noticed at Unbound, and I feel like for the most part a lot of the gravel pros do, is that they're pretty accessible. And I love that they'll finish their race in 10, 11, 12 hours. They'll have a shower, have something to eat, come back. Then they're there at the finish line cheering people on and being accessible for people. And I don't think you see that necessarily at the World Tour, for example, or at maybe triathlons or wherever. No. Why do you think that it's like this in gravel, like that this culture is like this, that there's kind of no hierarchy?
I think it is kind of the part, like it's everyone's racing the same course and everyone's day is going to be super, super different. Like the difference is like the Tour de France, you can you could go out and ride the road, I guess, but like there isn't 4,000 people like following them that they could go later and be like, how long did that climb take you? A really, really long time? Wow, sorry. You know, like I think with the gravel, like I talked to a few of my like fellow pros about it, and we've argued as like, whose day is harder? If Unbound takes you Unbound takes you 10 hours, that's hard. That's really, really, really fast. But if Unbound takes you 22 hours, I'm on the side that's harder. I've never done anything for 22 hours straight. Like I can sleep for 12 hours. I can work for that a time. I can ride my bike for the longest ever has been 13 hours, but like I've never done anything for that long. And so I do think like there's that side of it's almost a mutual respect of we're all doing something super, super hard, and to pay respect to the people that are, you know, juggling family, full-time job, and also want to try go race 200 miles on a gravel that's going to slice your tires open, and they're going to have a hell of a day, and it's going to be really hot or it's going to be really rainy like last year, and they're still going to finish it. And I think that respect is part of it.
Yeah. And I think like there's almost an element while you get to do it for your living.
Yeah.
You're doing all this by yourself. You don't have a team getting the sponsors for you or organizing your race programs. So I think you're invested in this just as much as the person that's trying to do it in 20 hours as well, which is maybe the difference in why there's no kind of hierarchy, which I find really interesting.
Yeah. And also with that, like everyone's free to do their own thing. Like it's interesting with the Lifetime series, like they gave us these trading cards, like do whatever you want with them. And I was like, hell yeah, trading cards. I was like, I'll give these to whoever. And like, I was surprised how many people wanted a trading card. I put it on my story, was like, if anyone wants a trading card, like I'll send it to you. And then suddenly I had like a zillion responses. And, you know, I think it was like $100 of stamps later. I was like, well, there's 300 of all the trading cards I had. And so like, I had to like ask Lifetime to re-up. And then like other racers in the series were kind of like, I have trading cards, like throw those away. Like I'm just here to race. And so it's an interesting, like this sport gives you the opportunity to do whatever you like. You are your own manager, your own brand, your own privateer, whatever you want to say. You don't have an athlete manager that says you must show up here, you must do this. So I think with that, it's interesting. Like I do treat it a little bit differently. With the acknowledgement that the more people that do our sport, like the more, you know, it validates what we do.
And because you are doing it by yourself, and I know this is going off in a little bit of a different direction, how do you plan out your year in terms of what races you're going to do? What logistics? Do you have sponsors saying you have to do this? Do you have racers reaching out saying we'll give you money to do this? Like how are you mapping out a year when you've already got the Lifetime series as the core foundation and then everything around that?
Yeah, I was actually super torn this year to whether or not to do the series again, mostly because like I'm 32. I'm not going to race for 10 more years. And so like we were saying, like the Dirty Warney, or like, you know, Just Sarah has a race in Montana. There's the whole BWR series. I could go to Canada. Like, there's a zillion races. You could race every single weekend if you wanted to. And for me, I was like, should I spend another year going back to the same 6 towns and banging my head against the same 30 girls? I was like, I don't know. And so half of me was like, I want my redemption. I didn't feel good about my result last year. Yes, I do. I want to go back. Like, let's go. Let's be better this year. And half of me is like, I'd rather do this. I'd rather smut the little guys. And so I think that challenge is interesting. You definitely, like, I talked to my sponsors and I said, which races you care about? And a lot of them, like, I'm with Scott and Shimano are my 2 main ones. Shimano is a big sponsor of the Lifetime series, and I was also Gravel Worlds as well. Like, Panaracer is the one that we shared, and so I will go to Steamboat for Panaracer, and then also, like, at Unbound, I'm hosting a little plug for my ride so that actually people show up on Thursday. If you're there at Unbound on Thursday, come ride with me. But I'm going to do a ride with Panaracer on Thursday before Unbound. So you balance, like, if those partners are sponsors of big events and they care about them, they'll ask you to, with the knowledge that, like, you can say no if you truly feel like it's better for you mentally or physically to do something else, or if you have a better idea. So I think with that, it's an interesting, you can say yes to everything, and that and some racers do, and I'm truly astonished. Like, Pete Sennett he raced this week as well, and, like, a bunch of the guys that raced at Seattle last week went and did the Whiskey 50. Like, they're just built different. They've been doing this forever, and they can race back to back to back. Like, I was talking to Pete about it, and he was like, it's always inherently going to be easier than World Tour racing. I'm like, man, this is really hard. Like, yeah. And it's interesting. So I listened to your first episode with Trekkie, and his mentality sounds a lot like mine last year, and I was kind of like, oh no, I hope this works out for him. Because, like, he was like, I'm gonna try and go to every race, I'm in this series, I'm committed. And I was like, man, I was flying from California to all these races, you're flying from Australia to all these races, plus you have a kid, like, oh my gosh. And I'll be interested, because if he does like, he did really well at BWR, and then he did really well at Sea Otter. So I was like, first of all, he's starting from a higher level. Like, I finished 14th at Sea Otter, he finished 5th or something, very well. And so I was like, if he can kind of continue that trajectory, he will do really well. But if what happens to him is what happened to me, where you just kind of like, it'll be interesting. And I was listening to that being like, this is a cool case study to see, like, was I just bad at it because I'm new and he's been in this sport longer and, like, knows how to balance and juggle it? Or is it truly like the human body can't really do it? So that's a fun science experiment.
I agree. It's super interesting, and that's what you talked about. We spoke about with Trekkies. It's such a long year, but I guess everyone's different as well. And I heard Dylan Johnson saying that he struggled on the back end of the year, and that's why the discussion was, how do you, like, it's hard to be up for 7 races. You're going to have strengths in different races, and his mentality was like, I'm just going to try and do as well as I can in all of them. What's your mentality now, being that you've done the Lifetime series before, and how are you going to approach it?
I think it's interesting. So I was talking to, I've been thinking about it a lot. So it's 7 races this year. You can drop 2. So that is an interesting new dynamic. Last year it was 6 and you could drop 1. So last year I felt like the possibility that you have a devastating mechanical and can't finish a race is pretty high. So I'm going to do all 6. I raced Crusher in the Tusher last year, 2 weeks after having COVID, and literally was so bad. Like, it was so, but, like, with that, you're like, I can't take a 0, because what happens if something, later in the year happens and I actually can't race? And so that was interesting. But this year, with being able to drop 2, there is a strategy element to it. Like, you can race all 7 and just be kind of tired for all of them. You can peak for certain ones, but then with that, like, every single person is like, peak for Unbound, peak for Leadville. Those are the ones people care about, because those, if you win those or do well at those have bigger implications than doing well in the Lifetime Grand Prix generally, outside of the payout that you might get from the Grand Prix prize money. And so I think with that, like, if you were being strategic, you could say, nobody cares about Crusher in the Tusher. I'm going to peak for that one in July. Like, Schwamigan is a 90-minute drag race through the woods in the mud. I'm going to peak for that one. I'm going to do 40-20s until my legs fall off, and I'm going to be ready for that crazy course. So I think it's an interesting, like, everyone focuses on the first race, Sea Otter, and they focus on Unbound, and they focus on Leadville. And I'm looking at my series and I'm like, crap, I'm doing the same thing. So I was like, but Unbound for me, like, I do generally say, like, worse, like the harder the course, the better. BWR, everyone's like, it's terrible, it's too much climbing, you're underbiked, it's too hot. And I'm like, bring it on. That one's always like, BWR California is my favorite race all year. And it's hard for me mentally because it's usually first. And I'm like, oh, that was my favorite one. So, and I got to race the rest of the year. But no, not to say like, but Unbound with that, like Unbound is so grueling and so can be so hot and so crazy that like that one I generally do really well. But if someone's like, hey, I'm not a diesel engine, skip Unbound. It takes you like 3 weeks to recover from that. Skip that one, drop that one, and go make sure you're ready for Crushing the Tusher, and then smoke that. I don't know. So like if you're a climber, like the rolling hills of Kansas are not going to be great, but the 2 FTP tests that Crushing the Tusher has up to 10,000 feet, like peak for that. So I do think this year there's an element of strategy. Every race is weighted the same. It doesn't matter. And that part, you can kind of take advantage of that. I say as I have no strategy to take advantage of that.
I love it. You touched on your training. I'm super interested because I'm looking at your Strava, and man, you make me feel like you put me to shame. You're doing back-to-back 20 hours a week. So you obviously love riding your bike. I think that's the most important thing. And then your body handles load really well. Yeah. But I know that there was a period, I think early last year maybe, that you didn't have a coach, but you're kind of doing things yourself. And now I think you have a coach at the moment. Tell me what's changed between when you were coaching yourself compared to now having a coach. And do you think that's helped in terms of your performance and improving?
I would say the main, kind of value add my coach has had is like calming me down. I have the tendency when I'm coaching myself is like, I'm not doing enough. I do handle load. I will do if left to my own devices, I will do 30 hours a week. There was weeks in the pandemic, I did like 40-hour weeks. I was just like, we're just going to ride. And I was fast. And with that, like recovery weeks were very rare. And so to have the structure and the, like, it's sad to say, but I really do need someone to say like, you're not getting slower. You're not getting out of shape by taking this week easy. Like you need to be able to have really easy days in order to have really hard days. I think the problem I fell into last year was the hard days were not hard because my easy days were too hard. And so everything was kind of this medium zone where I was always just kind of like, I was failing workouts, and the coach that I had was like, it's okay. Like you'll do great tomorrow. And I needed someone to be like, it's funny. Like the reason that it didn't work out with my coach last year was I was like, you're too nice. Like I have a lot of cheerleaders in my life and I really need you to be like, that was not okay. Like, sit your ass on the couch and recover tomorrow. And then the next day will be really hard. And so like my coach now, he literally sat me down. He was like, here's the guys that I coach that are in the tour. There's their hours. Yours are bigger. You're not World Tour Fitness. So like something's wrong. Yeah. And that for me, you're like, great. Okay. Science. I can do those numbers. And so with that, like he's been really, really good about adding structure around it and making sure the hard workouts are like really, really hard and being like, okay, now recover, like, because the next week's going to be really hard. So this past week, like today was really, really easy. In looking at my training for the next week, you're like, okay, I'm going to do 25 hours in the next 6 days. Like, let's go. And so that's been awesome. I think it's the trust. I've even like talked to a few other athletes that a lot of the coaches are like cooking with the same sauce, but if you don't trust them, like that's where you're going to lose it. So going full in and saying like, I trust you. I talk to you every single day and I'm going to tell you when I'm freaking out and I'm going to tell you when I'm panicking that I'm not fast enough. And you're going to calm me down and say, trust me. And that's been going well. My legs have felt super good so far. I definitely have work to do, but we've changed the strategy. These gravel races start so fast. Like the first hour and a half of Unbound is the hardest hour and a half of your life. And then you race for 9 hours after that. You're like, what in the world? So it really does reward like kind of cross country mountain bike fitness. And that's what I realized last year. I was like, if I'm out of the race in the first 20 minutes, it doesn't matter how good my 9-hour power is. If you're out of the race, if you don't have people to ride with, you can't close that gap. And so for me, I've focused a lot more this year on the high end, like beginning of the race power. And how do I stay with those groups?
Yeah. And especially like last year at Unbound, it being a mass start, like, so if you can stay as long as you can with the front group, and like I know, like Sophia was there for a fair while, and Emily Newsom, you're at so much of a benefit over your female competitors for doing that. But Unbound this year, it's not, you guys are going off separate, is that right?
Yeah, it's like so interesting. I'm so curious. So we'll go off after the pro men. So I do think it'll start fast, but it won't, like, I'm pretty confident in not getting dropped. I can hang with the best of the females. And so it'll be interesting to see. It'll be when the amateur fast guys catch us. That's when the race will be decided. And so it's an interesting, like, that will be it. Like, we'll probably have an hour of just women riding, and then this other group will blast through, and that will be the separation point. And so knowing that is going to be super interesting. And how do you play tactics? And like, if people go off the front when it's just women, like, do you wait for that like massive wave to come? Do you risk it? Like, what do you want to be further forward? Because if there's a crash, like, I don't know, it'll be super interesting. I'm super excited. I like that change that they made.
Yeah, I think it's such a great change. And because basically it rewards the person who can position themselves the best and use their elbows and feel comfortable at the front of the race,
totally,
as opposed to actually who's necessarily the best rider. So I think it's a great change to see what happens, but it's with the tactics of the guys coming from behind, that again changes it completely.
Totally.
So it's super interesting.
It's interesting. I think like women's gravel racing is really interesting because if you race at the front of the field, like if you get dropped, you're not like, ooh, a fast group behind me, you know, like it's just, that's the fastest. But like in the females, like sometimes like I've raced with Alex Howes before because he flattened. It's like, great, I'll hold Alex Howes' wheel. Like we'll go forward, you know, like, and it really is like, I'm a super social person. So if I have 5 guys around me, I'm like, hey guys, do you want to like try and I'm in 5th place. Do you want to try and catch the girls ahead of me? And they're like, hell yeah, I'm in 200th place. Like this gives some value to my race. Like, let's go. And so I've actually like hilariously, I have friends that I still keep in touch with on Instagram and stuff. They were like, remember that time we rode together? I'm like, yeah, I was super thankful for it.
It's so funny you say that because that's exactly what happened to me at Unbound last year. I think I got stuck behind a crash, was working back at the front of the group, and Sophia was in our group and we dragged her all the way to the front, right? And that's such a big benefit for her. But is it fair for everyone else? Probably not. But the same thing's happening,
should I have been up there? Yes.
Correct. Yeah, it's a fair point. And then after that, I flattered and then rode the last 60 Ks with Emily Newsom. And like for me, in my mind, it was like, and it's funny because we keep in contact from that experience, which is also a really cool thing as well. But I think she finished 3rd in that race, but it kind of gave me something to get through the last 60 Ks. Like, I'm going to help her hold on to 3rd place. But then she was rolling terms with me, which was really cool. So it was like an acknowledgement of she just didn't want the free ride. She wanted to work to hold the place, which I like that. And that's really cool. It's when, if you were just to sit on the whole time and take 3rd place, I'm like, I don't really know if that's fair or not.
Totally. I agree with that. And it's an interesting, like I ended up riding last year with Owen Vermeulen, who's Alexi Vermeulen's cousin. He was like, I'm Alexi's cousin. I had a flat. Like, can I help you in your race? And I was like, hell yeah, absolutely. And like, we ended up catching up to Ashton Lambie, who is like covered in World Cup things. And like, he was just having a blast. He literally was like, I don't care. We were saying hi to everyone. Like the 3 of us ended up riding like the whole, I don't know. Yeah. Like the last 60K together. And that just made it so much better in comparison to like the year before. I rode the last 4 hours of Unbound alone by myself into a headwind. And I was like, how are there's so many people I can see for 40 miles and there's no one ahead of me or behind me. Like, where did everybody go?
Yeah, it just changes the experience completely.
Totally. And so I do think like that's such a unique element of the sport in that like, you can make friends out there. But also what I hadn't put together before, I was listening to some of the guys that had raced in the World Tour talking on a panel at BWR, and they were like, gravel racing is different because you feel like you're in a breakaway all day. And if you get dropped from said breakaway, the guys behind you aren't like, hey bro, like let's hang out. Let's like be in the gruppetto together. They're like, no, I will crush you. I'm going to drop you. And you're like, what the hell? And so I do think like they're interestingly, when it's female male dynamic, you're kind of like, we're not actually competing against each other. And there is kind of you can be a team out there, and I like that. Yeah,
and that's something I guess that I hadn't really considered before too. Like when you get dropped, there's still a really cool experience you can have on a gravel race where that happens in a road race, and it's like day over, I'm basically riding the next 50, 60, 100 Ks by myself, and there's not a whole lot of fun in that.
Totally. again, with it being everyone's trying to do their fastest they possibly can, but those little experiences that you do have within the race, like people always ask, like, what's your favorite part about race day? And I'm kind of like, I don't know, when you get up in the morning and you have no idea what's going to happen that day, and every single other person that's getting up has no idea what's going to happen that day, I think that's a really cool, like, we're all going to go out there and like have a day.
Yeah, and actually it's funny you say that, and because I get asked a lot of times, like, why do I love gravel so much and how is it different to road? And I was talking to Trekkie about it, and he's like, something's always going to happen in these races because of the nature of it, and it's like, you just know that it's going to be epic, whether you get a mechanical that you have to work through it, or it's 12-hour race, so it's super hard. Is that kind of the same for you in terms of why you love gravel racing so much?
Yeah, I think I've talked about it a little bit. I treat this as like, my mentality is like, this type of suffering is a privilege. It's not something that everyone gets to have. Like, try to say this without crying, but like when my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer, like, he loved riding bikes. Like, that's what we shared. And like, I watched this disease, like, take away a lot of stuff from him. But even when like he couldn't feel the right side of his body, he was like, if I'm clipped into my mountain bike, like, I can do it. And like, I still remember, like, he was originally given like 10 months to live, and he lived for 3 years. But we went on a mountain bike ride, and like, he took me down this super sandy cut through, and I was like, Dad, this is not a trail. He was like, no, I ride it all the time, it's fine. He got through, no problem, was sitting at the bottom, and I was a professional mountain bike racer, and I completely like flipped over the bars, did not make it. And he like, I remember he gave me this look, and he was like, I still got it. And I still think about that, like, just, I don't know, like, you don't know what's gonna happen, and so the ability to go and do something crazy like ride 200 miles is truly like a privilege that not everyone gets to have, whether it's injury, whether it's sickness, whether it's, you know, socioeconomics or just opportunities. Like, the fact that this is my job is something that, like, that's what's always gonna like make this valuable. I don't know.
I love that. Thanks so much for sharing and being vulnerable. I resonate with that because I'd known that you'd lost your dad, and I lost my dad as well 6 years ago. And I think it's really served me, as horrible of an experience as it is, it's really served me well being able to have that perspective too. How lucky are we to be able to just to do this? And I know it's something that served you really well in your races too. Like, when it gets tough, you kind of like I've got a slash in my sidewall or whatever. And it's just like, if this is the worst that I'm going through, like, totally. I've been through worse. Like, I can get through this.
Yeah. And like, I think it's definitely like, before my dad got sick, I realized like everything I'd ever done in my life that was hard, I chose to do it. I chose to be the best I could be at school. I chose to be the best athlete I could be. And as soon as you have like that different type of pain, like thrust upon you, you don't have a choice. Like, it was completely different. And that emotional exhaustion is something that like everyone unfortunately will go through, and that kind of pain. And so I do think like the pain that you feel when you're on a bike and the suffering and like that's a good kind of pain. Like, that's the pain that you want to embrace and say like, that's okay if I'm, you know, if that rock just sliced my tire open, because again, like, I'm out here and I got to do this and I get to figure out how to overcome this. So if that goes back to like the resilience award, you're like, I think that we need to add something like you went out there and it was crazy and you did it.
Yeah, you had a day.
Yeah.
I love that. And I'd like to finish on asking you this question, is that whether you're a pro going for the win or whether you're someone that's just trying to finish it for the challenge, you've got to overcome stuff. Like, there's so many different things that can happen to you physically, mentally. How do you work through that?
One thing that helped me, I have a drawing of my dad's hand on my top tube. So that's always like when you look down and it's really hard, or you're like got your hands on your bar because it's really windy. Like you look down and you're like, okay, like I can do this. But I think you do need to figure out like something that you can go to. Like I hope that everyone doesn't have a reason like we do, but like if you have something that motivates you, whether it's your girlfriend or your wife or your family waiting for you at the finish line, or whether it's, just yourself, you promise yourself and the training that you've put into it, just have something that you're ready to use when things get dark, and a reason why you want to finish this race.
Yeah, I love that. It's and it's something like it's so similar, obviously, that we share, is that I know when things are getting tough for me, it's thinking about my dad as well. And also one of the really cool things that I like about doing gravel races is that everyone's going to go through a tough stage at some point.
Yeah.
And it's like going back to almost like that resilience award. It's like everyone is going to go through that. So basically, if you finish, you're a winner, right? It doesn't matter whether you're first or 1,000th, really. Everyone's had a day, and I think that's the great thing about gravel is it's like almost one big equal playing field because everyone's trying to get through something. Here in Australia, like we're very much a growing scene compared to where you guys currently are in the States. So I think people hearing this, it really gives an understanding of why you guys love this type of racing so much. So hopefully sharing these stories, and I think it will, and the same as Trekkie, and hopefully others that we get in the podcast as well, just can share the excitement.
You're
the second. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, so if it fails, it's only like half my fault.
I think
we'll go from here. No, this is awesome.
It's probably mostly my fault, I think.
No.
But yeah, sharing this story is so cool, and that's why I love this style of racing and getting to meet people like you, and then hopefully sharing your story with hopefully heaps of listeners. So thanks so much for your time.
I'm super honored. I'm super honored.
And good luck for Unbound.
Thank you. Will I see you there? Are you coming over again?
I'm not coming over this year, but
absolutely not.
there's too many other good races to do, like you mentioned. So
it's hard. It's crazy. Like it is. I would love to just come and do like a Australia, Europe, like everything. Like the Traca just happened last weekend, and you're like, that looks amazing. So I do. Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's so many to do.
Maybe I think it's time we had words with Pedal Mafia. It's time to get Izzy King down under for a gravel race.
There you go. Yeah, I appreciate that. Let's make it happen.
I love it. All right. Thanks so much, Izzy. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good one.